As President Donald Trump officially launches his trade war, seemingly against the world, the American economy is beginning to flash red. There are new numbers that show the job market in the state stalled, with just 73,000 positions were added last month. That's far fewer than were expected. That's not all. The May and June job numbers just got revised. There were actually 258,000 fewer jobs created than initially reported, and it all adds up to the weakest job creation the Americans have seen in decades outside of recessions. According to the Trump administration, the weakness is, they say, a one-off.
I think that there probably were a lot of firms that, sort of sitting there in May and June saying, hey, this tariff stuff's about to be resolved. This bill, hopefully becomes law within a month or two. Maybe I'm just going to hold off on this investment project. Maybe I'm just going to hold off until I know what the investment incentives are because the bill is law. Maybe I'm just going to hold off on opening this new office until I know what the tariff situation looks like. That's totally reasonable and absolutely something that you would expect. However, that's done now. That uncertainty is resolved.
We're joined now by someone who's been inside the president's mind on trade. Everett Eissenstat was Trump's deputy director of the U.S. National Economic Council and former deputy assistant to President Trump for international economic affairs. He is now a partner at Squire Patton Boggs. Everett, very good to have you on the program.
It's a great pleasure to be with you today.
The president has used tariffs as leverage in trade talks, and with no deal with the Canadians now, the pressure is going up. What are the sticking points quite likely to be in our relationship?
I think, the United States and Canada have a long trading relationship, and some of the issues that we are working to resolve, I've literally been around for hundreds of years. You think about some of the timber disputes, and I think that goes way back in our history, and there's still, tension there. And of course, with the Section 232 on timber, that's one area I think that we're going to need to work through. But to put it in the broader context, it's important to remember that we do have the U.S., and I know it's the Canada-U.S.-Mexico agreement, CUSMA in Canada, but the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement in the United States, USMCA, that really is the foundation of our relationship right now. And the fact that that agreement remains intact to the most part. I mean, obviously, there's things that are happening that are not in compliance with it. But it does provide some space for a longer conversation than it might have with other economies. So it's a really important foundational piece. There's obviously a review of the agreement coming up that's going to be very important as well. But there are many issues under discussion, everything from dairy to mineral rights, supply chains, border security. There's just always issues that we're going to need to work together on.
I know you're not inside the room for this particular round, and I know we are heading towards that USMCA renegotiation next year. But if you were to take a guess about what the sticking issue is now, is it supply management around dairy, for instance? Is it softwood lumber, as you describe? Is it steel and aluminum? Is it Canada perhaps refusing to take a 15% tariff?
Well, let's put it from the perspective of President Trump. I think what the president sees is a country that we have a bilateral trade deficit. And obviously, the economic buying power between our two economies is very different, just a population. But the trade deficit matters to him. And so anything that can be seen as rebalancing that trade deficit is going to be seen as a positive. Putting that in context, if the issues you described, whether they are opening up additional market access for dairy, curtailing, and I'm not saying this is a good idea, but just, for example, having a more balanced trade in lumber and wood products and things like that could be seen as addressing some of those issues. There's also a number of other areas that he's interested in. And if you've seen the framework agreements that have been negotiated, and some are, have been drafted with text and some are more conceptual, but those frameworks have within them an investment component. And that investment component is geared towards supply chains and reshoring in the United States. So I think there may be some room there as well for our two economies to collaborate and address some of those concerns, because there is a lot of great synergies between our two economies. And I think it's a natural state for us to be mutually beneficial trading relationship. But right now, I think the president sees some steps that need to be taken to get there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have to tell you, Canada and the U.S. have had free trade longer than Canada, the U.S., and Mexico, and that it has been, to a large degree, a very prosperous relationship. Why does the president, whether it's Canada or another country, believe that American businesses should have unfettered rights to other countries' markets, but other countries' businesses should pay to access the U.S. market?
Well, that's a great question. I'm not sure he might describe it exactly as you did. I would not. I would say what he's looking for is enhanced market access for U.S. exports. And conceptually, his belief is that the U.S. economy has been open for many, many years. It is one of the most open economies in the world, or has been for many years. And that the U.S. carried, quote, the burden of security and defense for much of the world and really maintaining the global economic order for decades. And so he feels like that we've been taken advantage of, and that while there may have been a point in time where that was appropriate, that's no longer the case. So from his perspective, I think he'd like to see more burden sharing, in both with with economic on economic and trade issues, but also on defense issues, border security, all those things. I think he'd like to see more shared responsibility.
I think you're quite right in describing that's what he communicates and perhaps what he believes. There's another question about whether it's true, but let me put that aside for a moment. And just ask, because you're bringing up CUSMA and the renegotiation, is President Trump's ultimate goal here, when it comes particularly to Canada and the U.S., to just set up something right before that renegotiation, where we get to something that is more than 5 pages, that we get to the nitty-gritty and the 1,500 pages required? Is that what he's trying to do in this process?
There's definitely going to be more depth than there is in these frameworks. No question about it. There's so much more complexity there. One of the key things that he's going to be looking for is how do we deal with third party, what he'll call transshipment. How do you deal with third party inputs into the Canadian economy that might be become part of a Canadian product and then exported to the United States? He believes the rules of origin are too liberal on many things in that relationship. So one of the core things that I think will be under discussion in the CUSMA USMCA is rules of origin and how to ensure that, say Chinese content is not coming in, being put into, products, and really the benefit not going to the trading partner. That I think is one of the very, very most important parts. That is not something you're going to be able to resolve in a press release because of the super complex. And we may start to see some new concepts in rules of origin that haven't been part of that dialogue before. For example, in investment policy, there's a concept of foreign entity of concern, that you can't have a foreign entity of concern investing in certain sectors. There may be something like that that gets incorporated into the rules of origin. So it's going to be a very, very important area to watch. And I think that, if this goes well, which I hope it does, there may be parts of the relationship that get pulled in, maybe ancillary and not necessarily within the core of the agreement itself, but some agreement on supply chains and particularly critical minerals and things like that could strengthen the security and defense relationship as well, which I also know is a priority for President Trump.
Everett Eissenstat, thank you very much for your time this afternoon.
Great. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.